Moving along in our 2022 Louisville football position previews, we're going to discuss the wide receivers on this episode of the show. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into this bonus episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Today's episode brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. For those who don't know me, and for those who do know me, I'm Dalton Pence. I serve as a credentialed media member for Cardinal Sports Zone. I also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time to personally thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. Shout out to Locked On for the merch, by the way. I don't know if you can see it, but love the shirt, love the shirt. There is a good amount of stuff to talk about on today's episode. Moving right along in our 2022 Louisville football position previews, we will turn our attention to the wide receiver group today. First, by discussing what a possible depth chart could look like. We will then transition into discussing expectations for the newcomers. And then finally, we will identify some possible breakout stars. Starting out with the depth chart. Now, it goes with saying that this is a Louisville wide receiver group that it's kind of thin in numbers. I think that there's only 8 scholarship wide receivers on the roster. I think there's only eight scholarship wide receivers. There's 5 coming in. There were 5 that departed, and there are 3 that are returning. That's something to focus on this year. Is you're not only replacing Gunter Brewer, the wide receiver coach, you're also now having to replace some of the starters from last year. Tyler Harrell is at Alabama now. Justin Marshall is at Buffalo. Jordan Watkins is at Mississippi, so on and so forth. So, 5 of the wide receivers on last year's team are no longer on the team. But the team did go out and get 5 new wide receivers, 3 from the high school ranks and 2 transfers. So the question now becomes, well, what does the depth chart look like for the Louisville wide receiving core that has a ton to prove? It had a ton to prove last year, had some guys kind of come up through the woodwork and really solidify themselves. Well, now we're kind of back to square one with some aspects of it. But I do think that it seems like the starting receiving core is, or at least the starting 3, if you're considering, the X, Y, and Z depth chart. I think it's cut out, I think it's pretty straightforward. You're going to see, I think, Tyler Hudson, the Central Arkansas transfer, slide into the starting wide receiver 1 role. I think that he is bound to have a fantastic season. This really shouldn't surprise anyone. An FCS All-American. I do think that Hudson will be a starter. Ahmari Huggins-Bruce last season, who, had a very solid year. Especially later on in the season, he was 4th on the team in receiving, the second leading receiver coming back. He had 444 receiving yards to go on with 4 scores, and he did that on 29 receptions. So Ahmari Huggins-Bruce, probably the one of the starting, maybe the starting slot receiver. I think Braden Smith comes back and starts in that other position, assuming that he's going to be healthy. I know that he got cleared for some activities. I'm not sure if it was, like full on pads and stuff like that. I do apologize for my ignorance, but coming off of that torn ACL that I believe he suffered in the Florida State game last year. I think it was Florida State. Regardless, having him back, a veteran that knows this offense, has the camaraderie and the chemistry with Malik Cunningham, and like I mentioned, a veteran presence in the locker room. I think that it's a no-brainer that he is going to be a starter opposite of Tyler Hudson and Ahmari Huggins-Bruce. The real debate here, in my opinion, becomes who's going to back them up. That is the main question. Now, Last year, you can argue that Justin Marshall was the starting receiver, which pretty much he was. But I don't think that his replacement, which a lot of people have kind of called Dee Wiggins, Tyler Hudson, Justin Marshall's replacement because they're both taller receivers. So taller receivers that do well of getting into that second level of the defense. Both kind of have interesting situations where it's like maybe you look for a change of scenery, some different opportunity to try to carve out your own production. Justin Marshall really just could never get the production here at Louisville. We wish him the best of luck. It seems like both opportunity, maybe lack of targets and stuff like that. But Dee Wiggins seems to be like the direct replacement to Justin Marshall size-wise, and there really aren't a ton of taller receivers, outside of some of the guys coming in from this high school class. But I would assume that Dee Wiggins possibly could be Tyler Hudson's backup or the backup to Braden Smith. You're going to see him in certain situations. I know sometimes they go with 4 wideouts, so it'll be interesting to kind of see where Scott Satterfield, Lance Taylor go to in terms of getting Dee Wiggins in certain packages and stuff like that. Outside of that, I think that one of the players that maybe kind of gets lost in the sauce, so to speak, when you talk about this group is Josh Johnson. Johnson had a pretty solid year last year. I know that he's really been battling the injury bug through his career here at Louisville. He had 16 catches for 125 yards and a touchdown last season. Really, I think that he impressed whenever his number was called last season when he got targets. I think that he made the most of them. I think he made some big plays too. I think that Josh Johnson is very, very solid depth. I really look for him to be in this backup role to Ahmari Huggins-Bruce. And certain situations, I think that he's going to get, some solid snaps. So moving right along, that kind of leaves another spot open. I think that in that case, there's not much more that you can go to. I think that Jalen Carter, the walk-on that could be on scholarship, he could be a guy that backs up one of the X or Z receivers. You could see a guy like Chance Morrow, the 6'6" freshman from Charlotte, who the staff is high on, and Chris Bell, who was a late signee that could be into that mix, and also 4-star wide receiver Devaughn Mortimer from the same class. You have 3 freshmen that can be competing for some backup spots, second and third strings. It's really hard to kind of depict where the certain receivers are going to be playing, but there's going to be solid opportunity because at the end of the day, like last season, well, there's a lot of competition to be had in the wide receivers room. You have guys like Braden Smith and Ahmari Huggins-Bruce that have proven themselves in this offense, but at the end of the day, Ahmari Huggins-Bruce is going to be relied upon to have a bigger role. You have Braden Smith, but he's coming off of injury. So it's going to be interesting to see, is he going to be able to come back full strength? Is it going to take him some time to get acclimated back in the offense? Is there going to be some rust that needs to be shaken off? Is Tyler Hudson the real deal? Yes, we talk about his accomplishments at the FCS level, but obviously that has to translate over into Power 5 football. There's a lot of questions that we have to answer. What does Dee Wiggins bring to this wide receiving room? Is he going to be, a guy that they try to rely on early on because he's a veteran presence that's played a lot of Power 5 football? It seems like 4 of the 8 receivers on this, in the wide receiving committee right now, or 4 of the 9 if you want to include Jalen Carter, don't really have, any Power 5 experience. 3 of them have never played a college down, and one of them is an FCS All-American. So, these are some valid questions that it's going to be pretty much one of those, okay, prove it to me. Go out there and make the most out of your opportunities, and we'll play the players that are producing the most. So I think a depth chart, kind of like the running back committee, not so much in the same light of the running backs, because I think that the running back committee is one of those you just have to find carries, and it's hard to do when you have so many guys in the backfield that could be a number 1 running back option. But instead, for this wide receiving committee, it's okay, who is going to step up to the occasion? Now that's the big question. So one of the ways to answer that is by discussing the expectations for the 5 newcomers. We will discuss those here in just a second after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs, which shout out to the Colorado Avalanche for winning that, and the Major League Baseball season, which is inching closer towards the All-Star break. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores, and it remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, overall podcast, and news this season. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all the events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen every day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. Moving right along, discussing the preview for the wide receivers position in the long list of this series. The third installment, if you haven't checked out already, the quarterback position and the running back position addressed in the past couple episodes, so be sure to check that out on whatever streaming service you use. But moving on into the second segment, we did this with the running backs committee, which I really like the format of that show. I want to talk about what to expect from the 5 newcomers this season. The first one, and I think this is kind of the most important one in terms of how it could have implications on the season, is Tyler Hudson, and he's kind of the player. It's you would assume it is going to have a very solid season because it seems like it's going to translate over. He was a second team AP FCS All-American last year, had 62 catches, 1,242 yards, 8 of those being touchdowns. Apparently, the coaching staff has been very, very, very high on Tyler Hudson's progress in spring ball and in the off season. So I think that the writing is on the wall that he may be wide receiver 1 heading into the fall, heading into off season, fall camp. So, and being a veteran guy that's played, college downs, this is a money year for Tyler Hudson. I think that Tyler Hudson can make himself a lot of money this year, even in an offense that runs the ball the majority of the time. That's something that you also have to focus on, and you have to acknowledge when you talk about the expectations for this team, or really in specifics to the wide receiving committees, because this is an offense that runs the ball the majority of the time. Not only do you have a lot of mouths to feed in terms of carries in the running backs committee, but you also have one of, if not the most dangerous dual threat quarterback in the country in Malik Cunningham, who had over 1,000 yards on the ground last year and 20 rushing touchdowns. That was one more than he had passing touchdowns. So that is something that you have to focus on. Yes, the expectations. This is where, like the running backs committee, you cannot base everything off the statistical aspect of things because it's going to be misleading. Just because Tyler Hudson might not get 1,250 yards doesn't mean he might not take the next step forward. Really, for me, it's just him being reliable. Passing the eye test, obviously, I think that he has to create separation from Power 5 level defensive backs and, be able to affect the game. And if we're seeing instances to where, his yards per reception is a good amount and, he's being able to find the end zone, that's something that, I'm very interested to see. I think that overall that's going to be an instance to where, hey, at the end of the day, he's going to be relied upon to be a big force on this team. Another guy is Miami transfer Dee Wiggins. That's somebody we can't really count out as well. We talk about him maybe being a second string. There's a possibility he may start over Braden Smith. I'm not necessarily sure due to Smith's comfort in the system. His familiarity with the system that Scott Satterfield runs as well, and quarterback Malik Cunningham. Last year was kind of an up and down year, kind of got played over last year, but he had 51 catches, 693 yards, and 7 touchdowns over the past 2 seasons. And if you want to put a lot of stock into him playing Louisville back in 2019, he had 3 catches, but he turned that into 85 yards and 2 touchdowns. So a big play type potential. I think that they probably look at this as a possible upgrade over Justin Marshall, 2 very similar playing styles. So I think that, Dee Wiggins is a player that, we talk about Tyler Hudson, we talk about Ahmari Huggins-Bruce, Braden Smith, Josh Johnson, and for good reason. But this is an instance to where, hey, you've got to focus on Dee Wiggins as well because he does have the college experience. He's played in the ACC before, and his experience is going to be relied upon. I think that this could be a big season for Dee Wiggins. The main question I have is with Malik Cunningham being a quarterback that really operates well in the intermediate throws over the middle, kind of, not necessarily, fitting the skill set that Dee Wiggins has in terms of being maybe a deep threat. I do think that Wiggins is very, very solid in terms of route running. I like his ability to get over the middle, especially with his size. And I think that, it fits Malik Cunningham's skill set pretty well. So I'm interested to see how Dee Wiggins is used in this offense. The three that are kind of hard to project are the three incoming freshmen. If the numbers were bigger, I do think that we could possibly see some possible red shirts, but that's not the case, right? There's currently 8 scholarship wide receivers. One goes down, and it's like, So maybe 1 red shirts, maybe. But even then, I think that there's a chance that red shirt could be burned if unfortunate injuries were to occur. So, like I said, you kind of have to plan for the unexpected just because you truly never know. The staff has pretty much been high on all 3 of these guys. Chance Morrow is the one that's kind of like, okay, this is interesting. 6'6", a guy that had offers from a ton of big time, programs across the country. He's ranked at, just inside the top 900, but had a lot of big time offers. 6'6", 185, a very, very solid end zone threat. A ton of size. I'm thinking Seth Dawkins when it comes to Chance Morrow. Being able to be a guy that might not necessarily be the biggest like speed guy or home run threat, but you can't miss him on the deep ball because with his size he's a matchup nightmare. Being able to be a solid route runner as well. Anytime you get inside of the red zone, I think that this could be an instance to where around the 10-yard line, you have to maybe think about putting Chance Morrow into the game just because of that size with it being 6'6". I mean, that's, you can't teach that size. I want to see him add some weight to that 185-pound frame. Ben Souders and the Louisville Strength and Conditioning department has really transformed this program over the past couple seasons. Ben Souders in his first season, but overall, the program as a whole has been very, very solid in that regard. Moving right along, Chris Bell is another guy that has gotten a lot of praise from this from this coaching staff, and he's a player that was recruited kind of under the radar. He's just outside of the top 1,250 best players. He's ranked as the 1,288th best prospect in the class, which is kind of a lower 3-star, but he was a guy that Louisville prioritized late in the winter. Had an unofficial visit to Florida State in October. Got an offer from Mississippi State in October. Ole Miss is a place that he visited. I mean, there was a lot of top interest from some programs. Especially for a guy that's from the state of Mississippi, 6'2", 220 pounds, from Yazoo City, Mississippi, Greenville Christian School. I love his film. I think that his film is extremely impressive. It really is wild to me that he's ranked outside of the top 1,200 because it seems like his film kind of reminds me a lot of like Des Fitzpatrick vibes. Doesn't do one thing that stands out more than others, but just an overall very solid receiver in all aspects. He's a guy that could get some solid playing time. Devaughn Mortimer is a guy that, kind of a late addition to the class, a late flip that, had a lot of people, surprised. 4-star prospect ranked just inside the top 350, flipped him from Florida State. Andrew Ivins, the Southeast recruiting analyst for 24/7 Sports, has compared him to Jesus Wilson from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Dangerous return man, has a lot of speed, is a state qualifier in the 100 and 200-meter dashes in track. 5'9", so kind of like Ahmari Huggins-Bruce, one of those players that once he touches the ball, I mean, hey, it's a possible house call. It will be an instance to where maybe the staff tries to utilize him early on as a player like a Tutu Atwell, getting him the ball in jet sweeps out in the flat. If any of the freshmen are going to see playing time early, I think that it's probably Devaughn Mortimer of the three that has the best chance. So ultimately, I think that you're going to see Tyler Hudson and Dee Wiggins play some big-time roles, and the three freshmen, Devaughn Mortimer, Chris Bell, and Chance Morrow, are going to be, possibly relied upon if depth issues occur. So the real question now becomes, okay, you have guys that are looking to prove themselves. Who are the possible breakout stars? There are two of them that I want to focus on. We'll talk about them here in just a second. If you are listening to this, obviously you will hear the implemented advertisements. So we'll talk to you in here in just a second. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're not going to hear those advertisements. So just keep that in mind. But heading into the final segment of the show, previewing the wide receiver position for the University of Louisville this upcoming season, the question now becomes, who are the possible breakout receivers? Number one, I think that this is pretty self-explanatory. Despite only having 444 receiving yards, I think Ahmari Huggins-Bruce is bound for stardom. The talent is there with the top two maybe amounts in carries, because you have to consider Marshawn Ford's going to get some, targets. Marshawn Ford's going to get targets. Tyler Hudson's going to get targets. I think that, Ahmari Huggins-Bruce, with his ability, we saw it later on in the season and the latter half of the year last season. He can make guys miss at all levels on the field. I'm really, really excited for, how Scott Satterfield and company are going to use him this season. I think that he is the guy that, if I'm talking about one breakout starter, it is definitely Ahmari Huggins-Bruce. I could see him kind of filling into that Tyler Harrell role as well. Maybe not necessarily just primarily a deep threat, but also, trying to stretch the field and maybe, kind of being used in a way like Wan'Dale Robinson was used at Kentucky last year, just trying to get him the ball in a handful of different ways, getting him the ball in space. That was the point of emphasis for Scott Satterfield when you tuned into the press conferences, on Mondays throughout the fall last year, was getting the ball to Ahmari Huggins-Bruce in space, because, good things happened when you got Ahmari Huggins-Bruce the ball in space. He is that dynamic, and I think that he's a player that Louisville is really, really going to rely upon to, hop into the mix and really be the breakout star that the Cardinals are looking for. Outside of that, I mean, it's hard to tell. Because I think that if you wanted to go with the popular opinion, I think that Tyler Hudson, it would probably be the number one or number 1A, 1B possibility here. But I think that, I don't know. I mean, I think that, the writing is on the wall with Hudson. I think that he's already a star, and we are going to see that, translate over from the FCS ranks. In my opinion, I'm gonna go with a guy that not a lot of people are talking about here. I think that now you have to view this in its own respect, because I do think that I don't think that he's going to necessarily maybe be a top 3 receiver in the in on the stat sheet. I think that Josh Johnson's going to have one heck of a season. He's a veteran in this group, a guy that when his number, like I mentioned, when his number was called last year, Josh Johnson made some big time plays. He's a guy that's been in this program. He's got a lot of leadership. Malik Cunningham has a lot of chemistry with him. He's been very, very adamant that Josh Johnson is a guy that he trusts. When he's healthy, I mean, the sky is the limit. Hopefully the injury bug is on the is in the rearview mirror. He's missed a couple seasons here and there for the Cardinals, but it seems like this is a year where he has the ability to really, really leave his mark and make some production. And I think that Josh Johnson is going to get his number called, especially early on in the season, because, well, let's face it, there's a lot of inexperience. 5 of these guys, 5 of the 8 or 5 of the 9 have yet to play a single snap here at Louisville. Josh Johnson knows this offense. He's got the chemistry spanning multiple years with Malik Cunningham. So I think that, his number is going to get relied upon a lot. And when, he shows the coaching staff that he can be relied upon, I think he's going to get a good amount of targets. So I don't necessarily think he's going to be a starter right away, because he's going to be playing behind Ahmari Huggins-Bruce. but I do think that Josh Johnson is primed to be a respective breakout star for the Louisville wide receiver group, possibly an X factor when you consider this group as a whole. So we talked about the depth chart and how it might not necessarily matter because, it depends on who's going to seize the opportunities. We discussed the expectations for the 5 newcomers and also kind of explained why Ahmari Huggins-Bruce and Josh Johnson are my possible breakout stars for this position group. Thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen every day. Be sure to check out Locked On ACC with host Candace Cooper. She does a great job of capturing the scenery of the ACC as a whole, does a great job of analyzing all of the teams across the board. So if you want to catch up on some conference news, be sure to check out the Locked On ACC podcast, which is hosted 5 days a week, throughout the week, like the Locked On Louisville show. But that's going to wrap up this bonus episode of the day. Have a great one. We will see you right back here